All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Senate Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Hammond, Senator Hansen, Senator Pizzina, Senator Spearman, Chair Harris.
Here, please mark Senator Hammond present. When he arrives, we've got 4 committee members present, so we have a quorum. We're just going to jump right into it and designate today Miller Day. Invite up our colleague Assemblyman Miller to start with AB 316. He's here.
And just in time. Thank you, Chair Harris and members of the committee. For the record, I am C.H. Miller, representing Assembly District 7 in Clark County, and you all are here for Miller time today. We're going to have some fun, maybe. I'm here today actually to present Assembly Bill 316, which revises the penalties for the unlawful possession of unregistered vehicles unfit for use. Under current law, a person who keeps on private property more than 2 unregistered vehicles that are no longer intended for or in condition for lawful use on highways is guilty of a misdemeanor, which is a criminal penalty. This has been in effect since 1973. So yes, you can potentially go to jail for having one too many unregistered, unfit for use Oldsmobiles on your property. But don't sound the alarms. No need to repurpose your Free Britney signs just yet and rush down to your local jail and protest. No one has been arrested for this particular offense since it has been in statute. At least no one has reported that. In a request for information regarding the issue, only a few jurisdictions took the time to actually respond. And while they all handled this issue in a slightly different manner, they mostly consider it a violation of public nuisance of municipal codes and apply enforcement measures through administrative and civil penalties. The goal of this bill is simply to align or modernize our statute in this regard to line up with what is common practice by our local jurisdictions. And so with that, we will roll right into the bill summary. AB 316 aims at reducing the penalty for those with vehicles that are not registered from a misdemeanor to a civil penalty of no more than $100 a day of a violation. It authorizes the local authority to adopt an ordinance prohibiting the same conduct, which is prohibited by the NRS 487290, and establishes a different civil penalty, and provides that if a local authority adopts an ordinance described in subsection 1 of subsection 1, a person who commits the conduct prohibited by NRS 487.290 shall be subject to the provisions of the local ordinance, including the civil penalty established by the local ordinance rather than the state law. That is it for my presentation. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Committee members, questions? Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Assemblyman, just a question. So if there are civil penalties involved, is that on top? Because many HOAs have that sort of thing going too. So is that on top of the HOAs, or is that in lieu of?
Thank you for the question. Is it okay? Go straight to the member. I need to come. Thank you. Thank you for the question. C.H. Miller for the record. So this would be in most jurisdictions that have HOAs, primarily they are under some type of local municipal code already, and it would apply, it wouldn't change any of that. So I imagine if there's a fee from the HOA that is charged, this fee would be charged by the government authority or the code enforcement, and it would be on top of that.
Okay, I think that's all the committee has for you. We'll go ahead and open it up for testimony at this time. If you are here to testify in support of AB 316, come on forward, grab a seat. Don't all rush up at once. All right, how about in Las Vegas? Testimony in support of AB 316? And BPS, can you please check the telephone lines?
Chair, there are no callers choosing to testify at this time.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and open it up then for testimony in opposition to AB 316. Anyone here in Carson? Okay, Las Vegas, testimony in opposition to AB 316. Not seeing any BPS. Can we check the phone, please?
Thank you, Chair. There are no callers choosing to testify at this time.
Okay. Lastly, we'll do neutral testimony. Anyone here in Carson to give neutral testimony? Anyone in Las Vegas for neutral testimony for AB 316? Okay, BPS, can we check the phones for neutral testimony, please?
Chair, there are no callers choosing to provide testimony at this time.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and close out the hearing then on AB 316 and open up the hearing on AB 303. Assemblyman Miller, welcome back. Long time no see.
Thank you, Chair Harris. C.H. Miller for the record. Thank you all, committee members. This is Miller Time Part 2. This one will last a bit longer, I imagine. All right. So today I'm here to present Assembly Bill 303, which revises provisions relating to the towing of motor vehicles under certain circumstances. I introduced AB 303 to fill the gaps from AB 301 that we passed last session, which revised provisions relating to the towing of a motor vehicle from a residential complex or a common interest community. It did three things: prohibited the non-consent towing of a vehicle from a residential complex or a common interest community when the reason for the tow is solely based on registration status. 2, it established a 48-hour waiting period from the time the vehicle arrived at the tow yard before a storage fee could be charged. And 3, it directed the NTA to establish a hardship tariff program for those who were faced with economic challenges beyond their control. AB 301 was necessary because the pandemic exposed what some would consider predatory behavior at a time when Nevadans were at their most vulnerable in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tow car operators were towing cars that were properly parked from apartment complexes and common interest communities simply because they did not display a current registration sticker. Now, I'm sure you all remember and are aware that it was a difficult time for many state agencies, and the DMV got pretty far behind with getting those stickers out. It didn't matter that the actual registration status of the vehicle could be checked in real time or that the vehicle was actually currently registered. Tow car operators were towing those cars anyway. It was such a problem that the NTA issued a letter telling the operators to not do this, but that didn't stop them. So this body passed AB 301, aimed at stopping that behavior. But this bill, primarily written by their counsel, didn't stop them either, as several of the operators chose to misinterpret the language and intent of the bill. Throughout the interim period, it was brought to my attention multiple times that people were still having their vehicles towed solely based on the registration status alone. Their vehicles were not being released when they were showed evidence that the vehicle was currently registered, and they were not given the 48 hours window to pick up their vehicle without requiring payment. Bottom line, these folks were still faced with having to deal with the trouble and expense of getting their cars back when the law had changed to prevent this type of tow. Even though we worked with the industry, allowing them to primarily write the language of AB 301, which was common sense, reasonable, and bipartisan, it did not stop them. How do I know? Well, because in the interim, I was hearing that the issue was persisting with multiple people. And when one constituent reached out to ask me directly about the law, because their vehicle had just been towed, I offered to take that constituent to retrieve their vehicle from the tow yard, and I saw firsthand how one tow operator had chosen to interpret the law. For example, rather than releasing the vehicle when presented with documentation that the car was in fact registered, he said no, that information had to be presented to the tow truck driver at the time the car was on the hook. Then when asked about the 48-hour window, as mentioned in subsection 6 of the current statute, where it states that an operator shall not charge a storage fee for 48 hours, the operator said, "We aren't charging a storage fee, it's an impound fee." When I offered to the gentleman that the tow was not requested by law enforcement and therefore there should not be an impound fee, I was told that I was not the owner of the vehicle, he would no longer speak to me anymore, and that I needed to leave the property, otherwise I'd be trespassed and they'd call the police. I'll add, this was not a very heated conversation. There was no yelling, arguing, or aggressive behavior. This was just how they chose to handle the challenge that the law had changed and they should not be charging the fee. But that is exactly why we are here today. So, Assembly Bill 303 clarifies that towing a vehicle solely because a vehicle registration is expired is a violation of the requirements of NRS 706-4477 and provides that if a vehicle is towed in violation of this provision, the owner of the vehicle is not required to pay any fee for the towing. It provides that if a motor vehicle is towed in violation of these provisions of this bill, or an operator charges a fee or cost for towing a vehicle in violation of this bill, the operator may be subject to certain penalties, and the owner of the vehicle may bring an action against the operator to recover any costs incurred by the person as a result of the violation, including without limitation any loss of income. Lastly, and probably most significant part of this bill is it expands the option to pay a hardship tariff for any vehicle that is towed pursuant to NRS 706-477 by eliminating subsection 7B of subsection 1 on page 4 and making it applicable to the entire section of the bill. At the same time, the bill limits the owner from paying the hardship tariff more than once per calendar year. Now, why is this important? Sadly, non-consent towing happens more often in communities and census tracts that historically have lower incomes, and folks face criminal and social injustices that exacerbate their economic challenges. And while having a vehicle towed for some is just the inconvenience of having to go down and get their vehicle, and it results in a Facebook post or a water cooler story, for others it can result in the loss of a job, a day's wages, or the decision to get the car out of the tow yard or buy food or pay the light bill. Could even mean going to a payday lender, or at the very worst, they are unable to get the vehicle out of the tow yard. The fees quickly accumulate and result in that person losing their vehicle to the tow operator, who has the authority to place a lien on the vehicle and then sell it at auction, oftentimes for less than the value. They can then sue the vehicle owner if there are additional fees or any other fees, while the vehicle owner may still have car payments and be subject to even more financial loss. So the hardship tariff just says, hey, yes, you messed up. You parked in the wrong place. Your car was towed, and it should have been. But we don't think you should lose the vehicle because of it. There's a penalty, and you must pay it. But if you have a financial hardship, here's a bit of help to make it a bit easier to retain your vehicle. There are some fiscal notes that have come up, and I know we're not going to discuss fiscal things in this particular committee, but I am also working on solutions to those and may have an amendment presented to you all before the potential work session that will address the fiscal impacts. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Committee members, do we have questions on Assembly Bill 303? Senator Pezzina.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much, Assemblyman, for the presentation. And I apologize because I read this Friday, and that feels like 17 years ago now. For the storage versus the impound fee, when reading through this, I noticed that it mentions that this bill prohibits an operator from charging any fee or cost for the towing solely because the vehicle registration is expired, and initially per the law, there was at least 48 hours after the vehicle arrived. So if someone were to get their vehicle towed not due to anything that has to do with the vehicle's registration, would that still exist? Would they still not have to pay for 48 hours, a storage fee?
So, thank you for the question, C.H. Miller, for the record. Thank you, Senator Pazina. In the current statute, they would still have to wait that 48 hours before being charged. This would remove that 48-hour window because at the end of the day, if a vehicle is towed solely based on its registration status, that just shouldn't happen. So there would be no need for the 48-hour window.
And just as a follow-up, was that 48-hour window then just for those cars that were towed due to a registration?
So the initial bill was dealing with registration issues, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Spearman.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So I think we had bills that were coming about the same time. Mine was with the HOA, they were the ones that issued the fees, or whatever they call them. And the person who issued the fee was also the person who could bid on the property and buy the property, or their spouse or somebody, I think it was to second degree, the way it changed, second degree consanguinity. So this is what troubles me. The tow operator, you said they can then sell it at auction. Who gets the money?
Thank you for the question, C.H. Miller, for the record. So my understanding of that process, which is what's currently in statute, is that the tow operator, and I'm sure that they're in the room, they'll be able to clarify this if I'm incorrect, but they would be selling the vehicle to recoup the costs that were, I guess, essentially owed to them for the storage fees that surmounted during the period of time that the vehicle was in their possession. Once they were able to sell it, I believe that my understanding is that is to remedy those costs or fees that are associated with that storage bill. So they would keep it.
And there's no other way.
C.H. Miller, for the record. I'm sure there's another way. I don't know what that is at this time.
Yeah, and I think last time we had some zip codes that showed where this happens more often than not. And so my question would be, so if the car is towed and then they sell it at auction, then the person who the car used to belong to, and you said, it's another financial encumbrance. I think it's probably a little bit more than financial encumbrance that could really ruin their life. So I don't know how to get around that. The person who chose it sells it and gets the money. I don't know how to get around that, but that's troubling to me.
And Vice Chair Spearman, I'll just note that we did hear a bill in this committee designed to address that issue. I believe it was presented by Mr. Sever from the DMV, and we had the Trucking Association in support of that bill. We moved it out of this committee, and so, we have not yet moved it out of this committee, but we did hear it. And if I remember correctly, the proposed solution is to require that the profit from the sale go back to the owner of the vehicle.
And my question was just tying to that, So.
Further questions from the committee? Okay, testimony time. Go ahead and open it up for testimony in support of Assembly Bill 303. Anyone in Carson City? Okay, anyone in Las Vegas testify in support of Assembly Bill 303? BPS, can we check the phones, please?
If you would like to testify in support of AB 303, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers choosing to testify at this time.
Thank you so much. Anyone here in Carson City to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 303?
Thank you, Chair. Lucas Valletta for the Nevada State Tow Association. We are in opposition to the bill. As in our view, the bill dramatically expands the scope of the hardship tariff. Among other tows that it would now apply to if the bill is passed are the tows of those vehicles posing an imminent threat of causing a substantial adverse effect on the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of a residential complex. In our view, allowing for a discounted tow at the expense of the tow operator in a situation such as that is bad policy. It removes the disincentive for unlawfully, or not unlawfully, but inappropriately parking a vehicle, in that instance, vehicles that could have hazardous fluids leaking, be in otherwise dangerous conditions. It's also our view that this proposal arbitrarily shifts the cost of those tows back to the tow operators, who, it's important to note, are rate regulated. So the cost of those tows and the storage fees are all regulated by the NTA to reflect the cost of providing that service in a reasonable margin. This proposal undermines the efficacy and legitimacy of that process. This bill would also come with a number of enforcement concerns. Clearly, there would be work required on behalf of the NTA. There are hundreds of these non-consent tows that occur on a weekly basis in Nevada, and presumably most of those people, if not all of them, will at least request the hardship, resulting in complaints and a burden on the operators to actually administer it, to review whatever documentation the NTA requires to be presented, and to demonstrate that the person's, in general, their needs outweigh or exceed their finances. So for all those reasons, we are opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Harris, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Paul Enos. I'm the CEO of the Nevada Trucking Association. We have a couple dozen tow operators in our association who are also opposed to Assembly Bill 303. This is a very regulated industry, and it should be, in terms of what you can charge when you're towing somebody else's property. These are issues that I've worked on quite a bit in this body to make sure that we don't have predatory towing occurred. And the last time we worked on it was in 2021, where we said, you know what, somebody who's having a financial hardship, they're probably not going to register their vehicle. So let's not tow that vehicle. And we came up with a hardship tariff in the Assembly side, and the Senate side, they said, hey, tow operators, it's illegal to tow a vehicle because it's not registered. And we as an industry, we're okay with that. But the hardship tariff remained. So let's talk about the tariff for a second. The tariff is what the Nevada Transportation Authority allows a towing company to charge based on everybody's different business models and practices. You're going to have more storage fees, greater storage fees at South Lake Tahoe than you are almost anywhere in the state because it costs a lot more for that property. So the NTA, they regulate what you can charge. And when you have that tariff, you cannot deviate from it without getting approval from the Nevada Transportation Authority. If you want to change that tariff, you have to go to them and ask for approval. We have a number of tow operators in this room who haven't had a tariff increase for years and years. And that's at the time when diesel's going up, drivers are going up, cost of trucks are going up, insurance is going up. And we're talking about profit margins that are tiny. They're, couple percent, definitely in the single digits. So if we have a hardship tariff for every vehicle that is towed, potentially, of 20%, that means that tow operator has the potential of losing money on that. And what does that mean? That means when a property manager is trying to control their property, I'm going to be honest with you, the only time I've come close to a fight in my adult life is over a parking spot in an apartment complex where I lived in my late 20s. So it does happen. But how people manage those is through the towing of these vehicles. That's how they're able to manage their property. I think there is a better way to address these situations by giving the tow operators a little more leeway to be able to grant their hardship tariff based on their own business case, based on the case that person makes. We've come a long way to make sure that we don't have predatory towing occurring in this state. and really given the NTA the teeth to go after those guys. It's a $10,000 potential violation, and at worst, they can revoke your ability to do business. I like that. I don't want bad people operating in this business, in this industry. It should be regulated, especially when you're towing somebody else's property. I don't think AB 303 really gets to that. I don't think it gets to helping the people who really have a financial hardship, because you don't have a financial hardship because you parked in somebody else's parking spot. You know, you were careless. I think how we're going about this in this bill really ends up creating more of a problem than a solution. And I know I'm over my 2 minutes, and I apologize, but thank you very much, Chair Harris, for indulging me.
Afternoon, Chair Harris. For the record, Danny Thompson, representing Snaptoe in Henderson, Nevada. I think Paul stated our case very succinctly, and that is that, you know, if everyone can claim a hardship tariff once a year, this business is a tough business to make money in, and I would tell you that at some point in time it would become a business decision whether or not we would take those tows. And if we don't take those tows, then it's going to become impossible for property managers to manage their property. I signed a lease on the apartment that I rent for this session in Reno. In the lease, it says my cars, I'm allowed 2, must be registered and they must be insured. And so, you know, this hardship tariff, I think, really creates a problem for us, because at some point in time for us it becomes a business decision. And I think Assemblyman Miller is genuinely trying to help people who are in a bad spot. But like Paul said, if we want to give a break to someone, we can't. We can't deviate the tariff either way.
Mr. Thompson, did you just throw your apartment complex under the bus? No. And admit that they're violating the law because they're not supposed to be towing you if your car's not registered?
No, what I said is my lease requires that each car be registered and insured.
Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Question for any of you. You have tariffs, that's how they currently can pay. But if you're having do the tow companies have like contracts with apartment complexes or things like that where they also can be paid through those mechanisms? Because you're not. Okay, I see. Yes and no. Well, no, the reason I bring that up is, okay, if your tariff hasn't been raised in a long time, you now are confronted with a situation where a business calls you and says, look, I got some clown that parked in the wrong spot. Please come over here and tow this vehicle. And then they have no responsibility to pay you for that. The only pay mechanism is if the vehicle owner themselves have to pay the tariff, as it's called. That's the only way you guys can get paid?
Well, Senator, through the chair to you. The tariff sets the max rate that can be applied. The law authorizes the tow operator to recoup the cost either from the vehicle owner or by way of a lien, which results in the vehicle sales at auction, in some cases, to satisfy the lien. The lien is against the vehicle. It's a bit of a gray area as to whether a property owner could pay the tariff rate that is due on the tow. In my view, I think that is permissible, but it's not required. In other words, the tow operator doesn't have a right to recoup the cost of that tow from the property owner under any circumstance, and so there's no mechanism to ensure payment. If the property owner wants to make the payment, that can be done, but it's not a mechanism that can frankly make this whole system work. Much relies on, frankly, the lien authorization.
Yeah, Mr. Follett, I think his question might have been related to the contractual relationship between the tow truck company and the apartment complex.
Correct.
Is
That's
there
what I was
payment
getting
there?
Oh, for the service of towing vehicles in general? One of the operators can answer that better than I can.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, next round. Ladies first.
Thank you very much. My name is Susan Zinzer. I'm the owner of DNS Tow and have been for 32 years. In answer to your question, if I tow a car from a property owner, the property owner can't pay me. It has to come from the vehicle owner. All costs have to go to that. So that would be no. There's a lot of things, I completely oppose this bill, obviously. I have a hard time defining hardship tariff versus responsibility. Hardship tariff is, yes, you're having a hard time, you can't register your car, that should be off limits. That's a true hardship tariff. But when you park in the wrong place, or you park in a red zone, or you park in a fire hydrant, and you get to come and get a discount for that, that doesn't seem much of a hardship to me. That seems blatant disregard for the law, honestly. And so if they have to come and pay for that, then that's going to stop them from driving back to the apartment complex and once again parking in handicap because it's closer to the door. That's not okay. We need to be the teeth so that the behavior is what everybody else is expected to do. So a hardship would be massively hard to manage. It would be hard to orchestrate. It's going to cost money to do that, all just so that we can tow for free. Towers aren't going to do that for very long because we can't afford to. So that would be my comments.
I'm Michael Bombach. I am the president of the Nevada State Tow Association and the owner of Milne Towing here in Sparks, Nevada.
Can you spell your name for the record, please?
Michael, and then last name is Bombach, Baumbach. All right, thank you. To answer the question you had earlier too, the tariff are the only charges that a tow operator is allowed to put against the vehicle for our lien. So there's nothing else. Every charge we put against the vehicle for non-consent must be approved by the state, by the NTA.
I think you guys are still missing the idea of the question.
Okay, maybe you could clarify?
I made a deal with an apartment complex that I will come and tow their cars. Do you enter into a contractual relationship with the property owner so that you are the person that they call, and do they pay you to do that?
So typically, the way that most of the businesses do it up here in Sparks is you have to post signs on the property that state the towing company that goes to that property. And the towing company provides those signs, and they provide those signs with their company name on them. Per the agreement, they're non-exclusive agreements. So the property could be serviced by any number of towing companies as long as they have an agreement that allows that towing company to service that property.
Is there any money exchanged when that agreement happens?
So, no. And typically, properties are trying not to spend money anyways. Yeah. So properties tend to not want to spend money at all. So they don't have an incentive to pay money. And the tow operator is disallowed legally, and I think ethically, from paying any kickbacks. So that's not legal to happen. And if it does happen, I think the NTA should take care of that. There is a way for a property to pay a towing company a disposal charge, is what we call it, for abandoned vehicles. And the cost of removing a recreational vehicle or a motorhome from a private property is extremely expensive for the ultimate disposition. Those vehicles have to be prepared specifically before the landfill will accept them or a scrapyard will accept them if no one bids on that vehicle at auction. And I would promise you, almost every junk recreational vehicle, motorhome, or trailer, you've all seen them. No one picks them up at auction, and it's the responsibility of the tow operator to safely dispose of those vehicles. So, for instance, if the towing company is on a police rotation and a towing company is called to remove that recreational vehicle, we have to do it. And then if no one picks up the vehicle at auction, which is the mechanism created for a towing company to recover the costs incurred, then we still have to get rid of that vehicle. We can't just push it out on the street for the next tow operator to come pick up. So we are stuck with that cost burden, and it's a huge burden. So does that answer part of the question then, hopefully? Okay, great. And then I want to make a comment on the part of the bill that says you only have to have this hardship apply once per year. So most of the violators that the tow companies get are one-time violators. When you get your vehicle towed, you tend to follow the law and follow what the properties say you are supposed to abide by. So while it's a nice courtesy to offer a once-a-year discount, I think ultimately that's unnecessary because the act of towing is the deterrent. But anyways, so I'm going to go with some prepared remarks I made. The 2021 legislature created AB 301, which provided a limited hardship tariff discount for any vehicle impounded, in part due to a registration violation, and for no other reason. AB 301 also made it illegal to impound a vehicle solely because of the registration of the vehicle was expired. The thinking was if the registered owner was facing a hardship, that owner would be unable to pay for the registration of a vehicle and thus would be eligible for a hardship discount. The hardship tariff discount was provided with the underlying understanding that the operator of the vehicle was not responsible for any other parking violations and that the vehicle was parked correctly, minding its own business, and parked in its assigned parking stall where it could not hurt anyone or damage anything. AB 303 unreasonably expands the hardship tariff discount to apply to situations where the hardship has absolutely no bearing on. It removes the underlying understanding of AB 301 and acts to encourage certain types of parking violations. So what are some of those violations? We oftentimes get vehicles that might crash on private property. You could say a vehicle goes into a water ditch or it goes into a fountain. We've had that happen before. And the hardship tariff discount would also apply to those situations, which we believe is not a reasonable and true application of hardship. As Susan says, it's part of its bad choices. It's not. It doesn't mean that you are facing a financial hardship. Okay, and I'm over the 2 minutes. Thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Chair Harris, Vice Chair Spearman, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Draper with Argentum Partners. I'm here today on behalf of the Nevada State Apartment Association. The Nevada State Apartment Association represents more than 1,000 members around the state and more than 170,000 rental housing units. We are here today in opposition of AB 303. Our members not only include multifamily property owners and operators, but multiple tow companies who support them in the removal of illegally parked vehicles on their properties. Towing companies are strictly regulated as a state, by the state, as you know, and certainly play an important role in helping our members ensure their communities are safe and managed in an orderly manner with all their tenants and residents in mind. We're concerned that AB 303 further hampers a tow company's ability to recover fees incurred from towing from our member properties and increase the likelihood that they might not elect to tow from our properties at all. Obviously, the removal of tow companies are an integral part of our economy and ecology, and the removal of an illegally parked vehicle on private property would become more unnecessarily complicated and in some cases impossible under AB 303. And we're concerned that smaller tow companies would not be able to justify their operations if they were forced to reduce their fees, and larger tow companies would be forced to decline or certainly be much more discerning in working with our member properties, and in turn ultimately increase the cost that our housing providers have to charge their residents and tenants. So for those reasons, we're opposed to AB 303.
Senator Hansen, you had another question. Go ahead.
Actually, several, just kind of interesting. public versus private, you're obviously representing private property owners mainly. Were you guys, okay, I get lazy, there's no parking, I see a red zone in front of a fire hydrant, I pull in there, and at that point, I'm on a public street. Is that something that, obviously you guys wouldn't deal with, but you guys would deal with it? Do you guys have contracts with the law enforcement community, or how does that work exactly?
Michael Baumbach, President of the Nevada State Tow Association. So any impound that occurs on public property has to be requested by law enforcement.
Okay.
It's not a private property decision.
Okay, that was question one. And then on the private property side of things, all right, you have some guy that's deliberately parking in the wrong spot. Currently, but the registration on his vehicle is fine. Currently, you're allowed to call a tow company simply because, I'm in space 150 and technically I'm only supposed to be in 125. Does this law affect that in any way? Because your ability to do that?
For the record, Mike Draper, on behalf of the Nevada State Apartment Association, Chair, through you to Senator Hansen. Senator Hansen, the reason this law, this proposed law would affect that is by expanding the hardship provisions under this. So if somebody were to request a hardship, it doesn't affect our ability to tow that vehicle that's illegally parked. But if that vehicle owner were to request a hardship provision and in return, then the tow operators has to reduce their fee by 20%. It certainly disincentivizes the tow operator from working with us, right? We're talking about an industry that works on small margins, and if that tow operator feels like it's going to cost more to tow the vehicle and to store the vehicle, they're going to just opt not to start towing from certain properties or certainly certain vehicles at certain times. So that's our concern here is it really puts even more onerous conditions on the tow operators that we work with, who are already strictly regulated in every way by the state, and in return would put additional hardships on our properties and our members.
I got it. So they get the first time you got the hardship, the second time I'm kind of a habitual parking in the wrong spot sort of a guy. First time I pay the full price, second time I claim that I have a hardship issue, and then the pricing goes down by 20%? Is that essentially what we're doing here? Okay. Last question, and that is when Assemblyman Miller went to a tow yard, he was treated very shabbily, it sounded like, basically threatened with trespass. Is that something that the NTA would enforce? I mean, if I got some guy that's out of control in your industry and you represent that industry, obviously, I think he sounds like, he's not making it up, it doesn't sound like. So what avenues of redress for somebody like himself being treated like that exists currently under law, and how is that dealt with by the NTA?
Michael Baumbach, President of the Nevada States Tow Association. Thank you for the question. And so, yes, the Nevada Transportation Authority is the agency that person would go to, and it's actually very easy to report any of these instances where they are not sure if there's an issue. You can call them, you can go on their website and make a submittal, and the tow operator is required to respond to everyone, and an investigator from the Nevada Transportation Authority comes out and reviews those documents and makes sure that everyone's operating as they should. They review the agreements, they review the situation for the impound, they review the charges, they review absolutely everything. And, they keep the tow companies honest. And last time Mr. Miller spoke about this situation, he stated that they did not seek the Nevada Transportation Authority as a remedy, which in my opinion, is the absolute right way to go about it, because they already have the authority to make any corrections that need to occur. And all you have to do is ask them to, and they will absolutely proceed by that.
Okay, well, I'd have to say I got to defend Mr. Miller, or Assemblyman Miller in this case, because I wouldn't know that either. If I go there and I don't have a clue about what the charges are supposed to be, or, like being told it's an impound fee versus whatever the original fee was, you can see where just what I'm looking for is the average person going into a situation like this. I get a tow call, I get a tow call, car towed, it's going to your yard, a couple days go by, I go over there trying to figure out how to get it out of there, what are the costs? And then, you say, well, it's not that yeah, there was a law that was passed, and obviously Mr. Miller Assemblyman Miller would know all about it since he was involved in it, yet the guy at the yard was coming up with some other thing, that makes your industry look bad. And unfortunately, until this hearing, I wouldn't know myself that there was an NTA that regulates you guys. So, I can see they're trying to come up with some method to deal with guys that were basically abusing the system, it sounds like. But anyway, I'm trying to kind of figure out how this whole thing works and what's right and what's wrong in this whole thing. So obviously we don't want to put you guys out of business. I've used DNS actually to tow my plumbing trucks on several occasions when they broke down. So obviously not hopefully parking in the wrong spot, but just mechanical issues. So thank you for your great service to my company over the years. But in the meantime, I'm trying to figure out what's right and wrong, what we need to do, perhaps in statute, to help deal with some of the bad actors in the industry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No problem. Mr. Draper, you may want to get with Mr. Thompson, make sure that that's not one of your members. I'm 100% serious about this because I've heard about it way more times than it should be, given that the law passed, 2 years ago now. So just double check and see what the dealio is.
Chair, I know there was Mike Draper, for the record, there was an email exchange with one of my colleagues, and maybe it's the same issue or not, but we will absolutely work on it.
This is new complex, so.
Got it. We will work on that.
All right, thank you. All right, anyone else here in Carson City testify in opposition to AB 303? Okay, we'll go down to Las Vegas. Anyone in Las Vegas to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 303? Okay, BPS, can we check the phone for opposition testimony, please?
If you would like to testify in opposition to AB 303, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers choosing to testify at this time.
Okay, neutral testimony here in Carson. Okay, neutral in Las Vegas. Neutral on the phone.
If you would like to testify in neutral for AB 303, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, Chair Harris, Vice Chair Spearman. Peter Kruger on behalf of the Nevada Petroleum Marketers Association. Initially, as this bill was introduced, our association opposed AB 303, and during the time between moving from one house to the other and talking with the bill sponsor and our members, we are satisfied that our concern regarding tows from commercial property, in our case, where hazardous materials, abandoned vehicles are often left, would not be jeopardized by this bill. So therefore, we are neutral at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Assemblyman Miller, would you like to make any closing comments?
Thank you, C.H. Miller, for the record, and I'm just going to make just a couple of comments just to clarify a couple of things. Unfortunately, the NTA was not able to join us today because I think they would also be able to answer some questions for us. But as it is my understanding, and I'm not the expert here, but it is my understanding after doing some research and communicating with different folks that private property owners can pay for the removal of vehicles from their properties. I learned that in working on the other Bill 316 in dealing with sometimes rural property owners have to pay, otherwise the operators will not come out to get the vehicles. And that may be the disposal cost that was referenced. I'm not totally 100% sure on that, but private property owners can pay to have a vehicle towed from their property, a non-consent tow. Additionally, we would be, when we talk about this hardship tariff, I want to make it clear that a person can only be eligible for a hardship tariff if they meet certain requirements. Now, the NTA had started the process of initiating those requirements, and the things that they were looking at were things like being 200% below the poverty line, receiving some type of social benefit from the state or the government, having lost a recent loss of job or some things like that. So we're not talking about we're not talking about wealthy people. We're not talking about, like, there's a pretty extreme situation if you meet the hardship eligibility standard. Now, if we're talking about people that are 200% below the poverty line, and we're assuming that 100% of the tolls, the non-consent tolls, are going to receive a hardship tariff, that means that we're towing out of communities where folks live at 200% below the poverty line. I would suggest, as someone mentioned, this could be a business decision. I would suggest pursuing contract relationships in communities where folks are not living 200% below the poverty line, and only going in those other communities when it's absolutely necessary, and not to, I'll just stop there before I say the wrong thing. Lastly, I just want to be very clear that AB 301 nor AB 303 affects the ability for law enforcement to tow a vehicle from anywhere for any reason. The hardship tariff does not apply to a vehicle that is parked in a red zone or a handicap spot. So the idea that people are going to park in these places and be able to get this hardship tariff is just wrong. That's not true. And again, like I said, law enforcement, they can tow a car from anywhere for whatever their reasons are, and that would not apply to them. This would not apply to them either. With that, I think I've clarified everything that I wanted to make sure was clarified for the record, and I thank you all for your time.
All right, thank you. Before we close it out, I'll just say I don't know how much most of y'all make, but I have very much, for a long point in my life, have been in a situation where if my car got towed, it didn't matter why it got towed. That could be the end of things. I would lose the car. I'd lose my job because I couldn't get to my job. I've had to accompany a friend who got towed outside of downtown Las Vegas and pay $350 because she was never going to have it, or her only vehicle would have been gone, and I was just fortunate enough to have that kind of money at that time, and she was fortunate enough, I guess, to be friends with me at that time. Or there are consequences that can be fairly dire for some folks, and so I just don't want to underestimate the impact that sometimes these fees can have on people and their lives, right? While also, of course, balancing small business and interests that are just as equal and large. But I don't know if a hardship is created by why you were towed. It's created by the virtue of the tow itself. And I'm hoping that maybe we can find some room to give some folks who needed a break, because it's not a deterrent for people who have plenty of money. Right? It's only a deterrent, and it's probably not even a deterrent for people who don't have money, right? But the impact is really different depending on where you sit on the economic spectrum, and I think we have to think a little bit more about whether we can help some of those folks who are truly at the bottom so that they can continue to go to work and live their lives, and that one mistake, even if it is a mistake or being a jerk, right, doesn't cost you your job and inevitably your home and some of these other things. So thank you all, though. Appreciate it. With that, we'll close out the hearing on AB 303 and slide right on into public comment. Anyone here to give public comment? Okay. Go ahead, sir. Any topic. Yeah. As long as it's not towing. Or we'll have to haul you out of here. Huh?
Now we're good. Okay, I get the message. I'm George Taylor. I'm a resident of Reno. For some time, I have studied the costs and environmental impacts of all types of energy, of electricity generation, and published think tank reports and so on. I just picked myself up the other day. I haven't come to visit people at the legislature here before, but I just picked myself up the other day saying, you know, I bet the long-term plan is being discussed, and I think there's a recent event that could be relevant. So I'm not here for anything related to this session. It's longer term. But the relevant event is that most of the cities and towns in Utah are part of an association called UAMPS. It does not include Salt Lake City. That's a separate entity. But those cities and towns have owned their own generation facilities for quite a while of various kinds: coal, gas, wind, solar, geothermal. They have decided to gather together and build a new small modular reactor nuclear facility on the federal reservation in Idaho and ship the power back to Utah. So the light bulb that went on for me was, if they continue to do that over the next 4, 5, or 6 years, it might be something that we could look at to consider as an alternative. And I just wanted to propose the idea that we support a wide open investigation by NV Energy and the PUC to look at all of our options, including that one, because it might change the game, because it could be conveniently sized for northern Nevada and separately for southern Nevada, since they're pretty far apart. And those other guys over there in Utah are going to, be the pioneers who get the arrows in their back. We might possibly be able to take advantage of what they learn and see if that's an option. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else here to give public comment? Okay, not seeing anyone in Las Vegas. BPS, can we check the phones, please?
Chair, the lines are open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
All right, thank you. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we will be adjourned. Have a great day.